Hello there, Drew Hanish of Whiskey Lore, and time for another whiskey tasting. I'm wearing a smoky tie today. That means there's some smoke involved in here, although this is not a peated whiskey kind of thing. This is a distillery in Kentucky that I went to 3 years ago. I have a bottle of their whiskey. I'm going to do a tasting on it. We're going to talk a little bit about the distillery, a little of its history, and the fact that I am not jumping into doing an update to my experience in Kentucky bourbon book anytime soon, because I need to really get out on the road and start promoting the Tennessee whiskey history book. And so what I'm going to do instead is I've been to a lot of these distilleries. I just haven't written profiles on them or updated profiles when I've gone back and visited them again. And so everybody who purchases the book gets a little code, and they're able to go online and be able to see an online version of my 32 distillery profiles. Well, I'm going to start adding some more profiles to that, and it's going to take me a little time to get them all in there and to do the updates of the places that I have been to, but I will definitely be doing that. So keep your eye out, and if you want to watch my progress, just go to patreon.com/whiskeylore, because I'm actually going to be posting to the general public on day one the profiles as I do them, but then they will go to just the paid members the next day. So if you want to have a chance to see those, there'll be a 1-day window open to do that, and then they'll go into the paid memberships after that, and also on the website for people who bought the book and have the code. So there you go. That is my update on what's going on with Kentucky bourbon, because I know a lot of people are buying the book this year for loved ones and for themselves and doing trip planning. And distilleries do change after 3 years, especially since these were all visited pre-pandemic. So I do need to go in and do some updates on those profiles. And so I'm going to be doing that. Now this is a whiskey. This is from a distillery that I do not have on the website yet, but I will have as of tonight or tomorrow, depending on when I can actually get the upload going, and we'll be talking about also on Patreon tonight, and that is Cinder Smoke, which comes from the Bard Distillery, which is in Western Kentucky. And when I went out to Western Kentucky, I have to tell you, there weren't a ton of distilleries, but there was enough to make it worth your while. You have I-69, the I-69 corridor that goes down through there. And as you're going through that area, you have Owensboro. You can go to Green River, and then you can go to Bard. 35 minutes, 40 minutes down the road is Casey Jones. MB Roland is right after that. And then you can go into Tennessee if you want to, and there's a couple of distilleries there. You'll have the Leatherwood, and you'll also have the Old Glory Distillery. And so they're all kind of in this one area, not terribly far from each other. And then you can also toss in Dueling Ground, which is right across the border back in Kentucky, not that far to go. So they're definitely making it worth your while, and there's other distilleries coming out in Western Kentucky too. So this just, adds to the itinerary that you can create for yourself when you're doing your trips out in that direction. Now, Bard Distillery, if that name Bard sounds somewhat familiar, yes, it is related to Bardstown, and no, this distillery is not in Bardstown, but Tom, who is the part owner of the distillery, along with his wife Kim, his family actually goes back to his four times grandfather back is actually William Bard, who was the founder of Bardstown. So if you go to Bardstown and you see the little circle drive there, and you see the historic sign that says William Bard is the guy who founded, along with his brother David, the town of Bardstown. Well, here's the distillery that is tied to that family lineage. Now, as far as I know, they weren't distillers, but what happened is William's son, Isaac, moved out to Muhlenberg County, which is where the family is now, and he moved there in 1856. So the family, or 26. So the family's been there for almost 200 years at this point. So that is where they are. That's where they like to be. And what's cool about this distillery is that first of all, Tom and Kim are great people, so it's fun just to go in and talk with them, see what they're doing, because what they did was they bought the schoolhouse where Tom went to, K through 6, basically, and is turning it into a distillery. Now, I don't know about you, but I think back to my elementary school and I think, would I want to turn that into a distillery? But this is a 100-year-old building, so it's got a lot of history to it for the area. It's going to be a unique experience for people. They're still building it out. They've been making whiskey along the way, but they've also been sourcing whiskey. And so I have done a review of this in the past, and coming back in doing a review. And this is something that is going to be probably a little bit tougher to find these days. They now have a 17-year whiskey that they're doing, but this is a 13-year, and this is a straight bourbon whiskey, which is from Tennessee. Now, from the time that I purchased this, and you think 13-year-old whiskey, you go, where did they source this from? Got a good guess. You make your guesses down below, but there was one distillery that was doing 13-year-old whiskeys, and they won awards for them, and so guessing that's where they got them from. And so basically what they do is they source the barrels and then they spend a little extra time with them, and then these are actually cask strength versions of the whiskey. Now, it's cask strength, but for some reason the proof on this is a bit lower. It's actually 48.9% ABV. And it's unusual, I would say, for a American whiskey in warmer climates to actually drop in ABV. Usually it goes the other direction. So it's interesting. I don't know how that worked out, and I wish actually I thought at the time to ask Tom that question. He took me on the tour, but I have to say, I can't tell you much about the tour because we just got into such fascinating conversations about things that I was just sitting there and we were just having a nice conversation for an hour, and then all of a sudden I'm over doing a tasting and on my way out. So definitely worth a visit. It's right off the Western Kentucky Parkway, and like I say, it's maybe an hour from Green River and 35 to 40 minutes away from Casey Jones. So some good places you can check out in that direction. Now, when I got this whiskey and I was thinking about what it compares to, I thought, is there a minerally note in this? And there is not. So that adds maybe a layer of confusion to this. I also get an herbally rye note in this. And that whiskey I'm speaking of usually doesn't have too much of a rye note. You'll pick a little out of it, but it's a low rye whiskey. So you don't tend to note that as much. But then there's this really interesting, this is more buttered popcorn probably than any whiskey that I have nosed, but a nice bit of caramel along with that just lays there underneath, almost like a there's a baking spice note in there, nice and sweet, little tobacco. I actually picked some mint out of this at one point. And the term char, or the reason why they call it smoke, is because they use a number 4 char, and so there is a bit of a smoky finish on this whiskey. Cheers. It doesn't necessarily remind me of that other whiskey. It's got a personality all its own. I definitely pick up that caramel is in there, but then it dries out, and you get to this rye and oak note that come in. A little bit of a tannin in there that kind of blends with that rye spice. It's not overly peppery. It actually is very easy to drink, and it doesn't have, I think this is a good proof for it, that it doesn't need to be proofed down at all, and actually is very nice. I asked Tom actually while I was there, and this was 3 years ago, I said, would you hire a blender to come in and blend these barrels that you're working on? But then as I was tasting these, I was like, he doesn't need a blender. He knows what he's doing. They're doing a very interesting experiment too. They are doing what I've kind of talked about Tennessee should maybe be doing, in that, as you'll learn in the Tennessee history book I just wrote, that they didn't necessarily believe in aging whiskey. They felt putting it through charcoal, sugar maple charcoal, was enough to take out the stuff that you're trying to take out through aging and trying to mellow that whiskey out by having it in the barrel and letting the wood interact with it. But their feeling was that you didn't necessarily need to stick it into a barrel. You could just run it through sugar maple charcoal. Well, he is doing a silver whiskey, silver mull whiskey. And when I listened to how he was talking about how he made it, initially, he was making it by basically taking a clean barrel, one that had been charred, but it was used, because you can use used barrels for corn whiskey, and still label it as corn whiskey. So he's got used barrels. Early Times is a good example of that. The regular Early Times is a Kentucky whiskey, not a Kentucky bourbon, because it's put into used cooperage. So puts it in the used barrel for 24 hours and pulls it out. It's enough to say it's whiskey, and it picked up no color whatsoever, and you're getting a chance to taste new make, basically. And so there's a skill to that, and you may like it, you may not like it, but they actually kind of talk about it like it's a mixer. In fact, they talked about making Bloody Marys with it and said it's fantastic with Bloody Marys. It is 62% alcohol by volume, so it is going to be a little stronger than your vodkas that you're probably normally putting into these mixed drinks. So it's an interesting idea. They also do liqueurs, and they do flavored whiskeys, not moonshine, but actually flavored whiskeys. And they've just come out with a bourbon, so they're doing a straight bourbon. And so I'm assuming they're sourcing that as well, but maybe not, maybe not. I haven't been there in a while, so worth a stop in if you head out to Western Kentucky. It's a very interesting whiskey for me because, again, if it is coming from where I think it's coming from, and I did taste it versus their 13-year-old, I actually preferred this. So that's why I say, in terms of blending or trying to pick out when a whiskey is good, I think Tom and Kim got that handled pretty well. I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. If you want to see more of these down the road, make sure that you snap there on the follow button there, and I don't know why, I forget what it's called on YouTube. Anyway, do that, and come on out to patreon.com/whiskeylore for free if you want to follow and see some of these different distilleries I'll be posting over time. Until next time, cheers and Slanjava.